today's story, Bug-Eyed Tales takes us to the edge of paranoia, where one man's greed collide with an unseen force. Meet Don Bruno, a man of business, or so he says, in a tale where curiosity tempts fate. Don Bruno will learn what happens when you cage both your wealth and your soul in the shadows. So have a listen to Trapped Cat by Fernán Caballero.
Don Bruno had always been a man driven by ambition, and now, after years of relentless pursuit, his dream had finally come true. He was the proud possessor of a capital of 3 million coins. To the casual observer, his journey might have seemed filled with endless trials and tribulations. But what did it matter now? He was super rich. Don Bruno was no ordinary old man. He was a peculiar figure, a one-eyed hunchback, traits that gave him an almost legendary air, like Quasimodo. Imagine him now hunched over his calculations, his single eye gleaming with a peculiar light. He was a creature of habit, a man of shadows and secrets. In the deepest recesses of his house, there lay a room so small and secluded that no human soul had ever crossed its threshold. Sinforosa, his loyal maid, had tried countless times to unravel the mysteries of this hidden chamber. But her efforts were always in vain. The old man guarded his secrets well, emerging from his lair only for meals or the rare visit from his friend Raimundo. These visits were infrequent, a mere blip in the monotonous passage of time, and Sinforosa's curiosity remained perpetually unsatisfied. For 10 long hours, Don Bruno had ensconced himself in his private sanctum, motionless and absorbed in some profound contemplation. He sat in an ancient leather armchair, elbows resting on the table, his head cradled in his hands. He seemed to be wrestling with some monumental problem, occasionally striking his forehead as if to jar loose a brilliant idea. Yet each time, a shadow of dissatisfaction crossed his face. He would rise silently, pacing the room with the restless energy of a trapped animal. Finally, after ensuring that the door was securely locked, Don Bruno approached a massive chest in the corner of the room. He moved with the stealth of a miser, glancing around as if expecting to find unseen eyes watching his every move. From his vest pocket, he drew a key, his inseparable companion, as he called it, and unlocked the box. The lid creaked open, and at the sight of its contents, Don Bruno's solitary eye sparkled with a feverish delight. Kneeling before the cabinet, Don Bruno looked almost reverent, his attention entirely on the small sacks nestled at the bottom. It was as if he was engaged in a private ritual, his mind absorbed in contemplation for a good 3 minutes, akin to the serenity found in a well-said prayer. With a composed grace, he rose and began to take out the sacks one by one. There were about a dozen, and he placed each on the table with deliberate care, arranging them in neat rows that suggested both order and purpose. The gentle rustle of the sacks as they touched the table made Don Bruno instinctively turn his head, his eyes flickering with the mild paranoia of a man with a secret. The thought of discovery brought a fleeting shadow to his brow. But who would find out? Who indeed? Satisfied with the arrangement, he sat down once more, his countenance one of quiet concentration. He began to count the sacks, his lips moving slightly as he repeated the process several times, ensuring with meticulous precision that not a single sack was missing. Each recounting brought him a measure of reassurance, a comfort in the certainty of his possessions. Finally, with the gentle care of a mother tucking her child into bed, Don Bruno gathered the sacks one by one. He held each for a moment, as if imparting a silent benediction, before placing them back into the chest. The act completed, he turned the key with a sense of finality, the familiar click offering him peace. Just as he finished, his maid's voice broke the stillness, calling out that his friend awaited him in the living room. Don Bruno double-checked the lock, the key a reassuring weight in his vest pocket. He left the room, pushing the door a couple of times to ensure the latch had caught properly, each push a gesture of his careful, methodical nature. The two friends greeted each other, though with a touch of coolness from Don Bruno, who was used to a hint of satire in every word spoken by his longtime compañero. Don Raimundo was a sort of smart Alec, who always had a clever remark or joke ready for any situation. Naturally, whenever he conversed with Don Bruno, he couldn't resist bringing up the mysterious room.
Look, Bruno, you can't fool me. There's something fishy going on in that nest, and there's a reason you spend most of your day in there.
Don Bruno, however, would always swear that it was merely his deep love for science that kept him locked away in that room. On this particular day, Don Raimundo had the brilliant idea to suggest that they take a little walk to clear their heads. Don Bruno would have gladly declined, but in the past some unexpected event had always provided him with a convenient excuse whenever Don Raimundo made the same suggestion. This time, however, there was no such escape, and he found himself with no choice but to agree. While the two men were out for a walk, the devil, who always sows mischief, tempted Sinforosa's curiosity for the nth time. She was eager to discover what her master was hiding in that room. It would have been almost impossible for her to succeed, if not for the lucky chance that provided her with a grimy, rusty key, which she had found among the many she had been trying to use for over a month. She inserted the key and managed to unlock the door, allowing Sinforosa to enter the room. Inside, she saw nothing but a chair, a chest, a table, and a pile of old books heaped in a corner. Looking at these, she began to believe what her master had told her so many times, that only his love for science could drive him to spend half his life in this sanctuary. She wondered if the chest would open easily, and tried a few more keys on it. Finding that it was not so simple, she decided to leave, satisfied that she had satiated her curiosity and promised herself not to trouble over such trivial matters in the future. She left, not noticing that as she closed the door, the house cat slipped inside. Don Bruno returned from his walk in a foul mood, with the temper of 200,000 devils. And indeed, he had good reason for it, since his friend's entire conversation had been reduced to telling him 1,000 stories and anecdotes, no doubt with the charitable intention of driving him crazy to see if he would reveal the secret buried within the four walls of the mysterious room. But Don Bruno was not a man to be easily deceived. No sooner had he entered the house and removed his top hat, an old relic of a headgear, worthy of being displayed in a museum of antiquities, he asked for dinner, which as always consisted of a plate of legumes, mostly lentils, and a glass of water. Don't think that Don Bruno dined on this because of economy, but rather because meat, Don Bruno says, dulls the intelligence, whereas legumes sharpen even the dullest of men. Don Bruno had just finished dinner and was ready to call it a night. He went to his bedroom, which was conveniently located next to the mysterious room that had been the source of curiosity and frustration. The wall between the two rooms was thin enough that he could hear even the faintest whisper of suspicious activity. As he changed into his comfiest nightcap, a gift from his only living relative, he thought he heard a strange noise. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination playing tricks on him. But then the noise grew louder, and Don Bruno's eyes grew wide with worry. The thought of someone stealing his precious treasure made him sweat bullets. Or rather, a single drop of sweat per hair, because that's just how anxious he was. But then, something unexpected happened. Don Bruno, the notorious scaredy cat, found his inner courage. Well, not exactly courage, more like a fierce determination to protect his beloved sacks or whatever it was he was hoarding. He lit a candle on his nightstand and, in his undergarments, very slowly went to peek through the keyhole, as he didn't dare enter the room abruptly. After observing and making sure the ruckus was over, he finally found the guts to step in. He relit the lamp that he had earlier dimmed to better explore and scrutinize the dark chamber. Since the room was small, he immediately saw that there was no one there. Then he felt the urge to give each sack a loving hug, as he had done a few hours earlier. He started taking them out and placing them on the floor, making sure to close the door from the inside first. But just as he had taken out the last sack, the lid of the chest suddenly fell, extinguishing the light. The loud bang startled the cat, which darted out from behind the furniture where it had been hiding. In his fright, Don Bruno tried to step out, but he tripped over the sacks and fell flat on his face. He then began to crawl slowly towards the door, hoping to escape. But fate was not on his side that night. As he reached out his arm, he inadvertently grabbed the cat's tail. The startled feline, feeling trapped and affronted, let out an ear-splitting screech. In a flurry of fur and claws, the cat turned on Don Bruno, sinking its sharp claws into his face. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Poor Don Bruno, overwhelmed and desperate, cried out for help at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing through the quiet house.
Help!
Sinforosa, the maid who had been sleeping soundly for a long time, was alarmed by the commotion. Hastily getting dressed, she rushed out onto the balcony, shouting,
"Thieves! Thieves! They are murdering my master!"
Her cries quickly filled the house with people, including Don Raimundo, who was a neighbor, and the first to think of heading towards the mysterious room. The door was forced open with kicks and blows, and there they found Don Bruno, furiously rolling on the floor, in his undergarments and sleeping cap, desperately clutching his face with hands stained with blood. Meanwhile, the cat bolted out, like a soul possessed by the devil, through the crowd gathered at the entrance. They finally lifted and dragged away Don Bruno, a battered shell of a man. His last good eye brutally clawed out by the cat. The crowd erupted into chaos, gasping and gesticulating wildly. And Don Raimundo rubbed salt in the wound, taunting his friend with the very phrase that had driven him mad.
I told you something fishy was going on in that room.
And so Don Bruno, a man who tried to hide his riches and his secrets, learned that the most dangerous traps are the ones we set for ourselves. His undoing came from a force too small to calculate, a single creature that slithered through the cracks of his carefully controlled life. In the end, it wasn't wealth, science, or even curiosity that brought him down, but the realization that some things can't be contained, no matter how hard you try to lock them away. A lesson, perhaps, for those who believe their treasures, their power, their very lives can be guarded behind closed doors. Because in bug-eyed tales, even the smallest scratch can leave a lasting scar.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel. Your encouragement helps us spin more yarns for your listening pleasure. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.